Go4Leadership, the podcast with Daniel and Gert.
Hello and welcome for today's Go4Leadership podcast. My guest today is Thomas Juli. Thomas, welcome to the podcast.
Well, hello.
Go4Leadership interviews.
Like always, I ask my guests to introduce themselves. So, Thomas, you have 30 seconds to let my listeners know who you are.
Okay, my name is Thomas Juli. I'm a human business architect. That is, I'm driven by helping businesses to become human, unfold our human potential, and thus being successful in the digital age.
I think that's a very, of course, profound topic, and it has a lot to do about having the right leader to, let's say, enrich and also, let's say, help the people to perform. So what is your definition of leadership, or how would you define leadership?
Well, okay, there is not just one definition. I'd say one very important element, especially in a VUCA world, is to leader knows how to unfold the potential of his or her team and thus thrive as a team.
How would you define the full potential of a team?
Well, I'd say, first of all, let's go to the individual. What's the full potential of an individual? I think this is something we have to explore. It's not a given set. It's not a discrete. It's actually infinite. The issue or the challenge we have is that we have been trained as functioning human resources instead of human beings. And that is an issue. So therefore, I think that when you find out who you really are, where your creativity is, for example, and your potential, that could be an adventure. And people, we think like it's just only about skills and what have you. No, there's so much more about us. And we just have to explore it and have to identify it. It's basically really about how can we rediscover our human being and this way shape our future. And it's not like you come up with a big plan. This is how we have to do it, especially in a business setting. And let's plan it and then let's execute it. In the past, this worked quite well. And at the present, the future, I think it will be more complicated.
My experience is that in particular in larger corporations, there's a huge thrive for following processes, following structures, following guidance. Do you think that this is kind of hindering such, let's say, such movements to have, let's say, the liberty of or individualism, let's say it this way?
It's not really like it doesn't really block it or impede it, and I think you have to balance the two. And you need to have something what I call strategic alignment. And on the one hand, it's not necessarily top down, but you need to have a strategy, and then you have the autonomy of a team, and you have to balance the two. And there can be some tension, which is normal. And if there's a balance, it's a stable balance, ideally. But when you know, it's like I'm an economist and a training, stability does not mean it's fixed. It's constantly moving. So you always have to align it. It's a continuous process. But it's the alignment of strategy and autonomy.
Do you think that there are certain, let's say, settings that would enable teams to, let's say, to behave like that? Do you think there are certain, let's say, environments that teams can, let's say, use this flexibility, and there are maybe settings where we have or teams cannot, let's say, play in this field?
Yes. Well, I've been working a lot as an Agile coach. So I'm a true believer in this agility or Agile. And when you're in an Agile environment where you're really focusing on generating value for the customer, delighting the customer, we have self-organizing teams, ideally autonomous teams, and this is, you can say, an ideal setting. It's necessary. Can you say it's necessary? It's sufficient? No, because even in an Agile setting, businesses still see people way too often as resources. So whenever when you treat people as resources, it's kind of like a dead end. The moment you realize we're not talking about resource, we're talking about people, and we're not perfect, and actually this imperfection makes us perfect, and you see what's possible with it. And use technology as a tool. I think you can be surprised by what is possible. So an agile setting is very helpful, and any setting where you realize, okay, actually we're focusing on the on people. Let's say, for example, a couple of weeks ago, I gave a keynote in Munich in front of an audience, of course, virtual audience. They were all pedagogues, teachers, and they were working in preschools and kindergarten and what have you. And I told them about human business. And then I realized, like, who am I telling them about the human business? Because they are the prime examples of human business, because they focus on the people, the students. And so therefore, whenever you have the purpose of the organization or the business is actually generating value for people, like in a social environment, that's ideal. Social businesses, for example, would be another example.
So if you are, let's say, if you are a leader of a team and you have, let's say, certain, let's say, targets or objectives to achieve, how would you enable, or what tips can you give such a leader to, let's say, stand ground and say, well, I want to be different. I want to go the agile way. So how would you, which tips or which arguments would you give this person for the superior to argue that, well, I will make my targets, but I would do it my way? Because I have seen many movements in agile ways, but of course there's always this reluctancy or this behavior to move back to classical ways of management, let's say leadership. And I'm a big fan of the agile approach, but of course it requires a lot of forces from the top and also from the people on the ground to go this way. Even there are some failures in between, which is, like you said, fully normal. That's what it is.
It's normal. When people say agile is about mindset, and there's some truth to it, because you have to understand the values and the principles of agile. And most important, you have to know, why are you doing this? You're not doing agile for the purpose of agile. Agile, I consider agile kind of like a door opener to more. So in this case, can help transform a traditional business into an agile business and later a human business. You have to know why you're doing this. If your goal is to, say, maximize shareholder value, I mean, which is an oxymoron, because it's there's a reason why quite a few people call it bullshit, and I'm one of them, because it doesn't really generate value for the customer. It's tough. If you understand the outcome actually has to benefit the customer, that's the first, how should I say, critical element. Then you have to understand, okay, who's doing the work? How do you get there? And then we're talking about the people. And what else, or who else should benefit from it? Then we're talking about the business. So we're talking about the why, how, and the what. Just like what Simon Sinek, explains in the Golden Circle, in this book, Start With Why. The why is the purpose, generating value for the customer in an agile setting. And I'd say in human business, actually generating value for people in general. How is the people? And you can also say the whole environment, build and sustain, say, a happy workplace with the right tools and frameworks, etc. And the what is like what comes out of it, and this is like, could be the product, could be also like how does the business itself benefit from it? And it's not just the business, because a business is not functioning in isolation. A business is always embedded in something bigger, in a system. To have it more concrete, business is part of society. So the question is like, what does a business give back to society?
I'm fully with you, and I've seen so many companies just following because it's a, let's say, a trend, and they miss the part of the mindset. I always say the mindset drives behaviors, drives results. So it's fundamental that you impact, let's say, the mindset. Do you have any method or tools how you, I would say, influence the mindset of your people if they are, let's say, not open of maybe following the idea of agility?
Well, I think skeptics can best be convinced by results. And if you rationally, they probably say, yeah, it makes sense, but it's like, I have been doing certain things, certain management styles for 20, 30 years or 40 years, and it worked fine. Why should it work differently? Well, because the people you're working with, they are different. The marketplace has changed. And how do you convince them? Numbers is one thing. I mean, you can present with numbers and they understand it. It's not really too convincing. I think it's more effective when you share stories. Stories of how you benefited the customers, what's the value your employees got out of it, why all of a sudden they're really motivated. Do you want to have employees who just do the job, or do you want to have employees who identify themselves with the company because they know they will be a part of something bigger? They're highly motivated. I mean, if you have two teams, both have the same skills, but one of the teams says it's just a job. We go home because we have something bigger to work on. That really motivates us. Or you have the other team, maybe they have less skills, but they're highly motivated because they know we are building something big. We really help, say, solve a problem, and we see the results because we're in direct contact with the customer. Whom do you want to work with? With whom do you want to work with? That's a question. Now, if the answer is, okay, I want to work with a highly motivated team, then you're on the right track. But then it's just a step. Then you have to tell them, okay, why is it faster? Why is it actually better? How can you be more flexible? And I'd say it's important not to say, oh, everything you've done in the past is bad. It's not, because after all, if you're in business successfully, then it cannot be bad. So you have to tell them, it's like, we still want to use, say, those tools that still work quite well, but we want to improve them. We want to make them better. And it's a different approach. And actually, sometimes we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We are actually rediscovering who we are. You can ask them, there's a very simple question, kind of like a litmus test, and tells you a lot, very easily, where they are. You can say, okay, complete the following sentence. The business of business is about what? If they say making money, fine. If it's like it's people, or if it's a customer, the business of business, what is it about? If they say shareholder value, then ask, let's say, a millennial if they want to work for a company. They say the business of our business is shareholder value, or they say the business of business, our business is to restore an environment or to solve a certain given problem. Ask them, where would they like to work? And that is, you basically, you create an environment where it's, joy can actually be a driver.
Do you think it's very hard for large corporation to, let's say, to transform in this way of a customer obsessed, let's say, organization?
It may take longer, but it's possible. The bigger corporations that are quite often, frequently cited are, let's say, Microsoft, which has become agile over the last couple of years. At present, I'm working as a kind of like a head coach for Allianz, the insurance corporation. It's becoming agile a learning organization. It's a long way, no doubt, especially when you work in a company that has been around for more than 100 years. Is it possible? It's not only possible, it's a necessity. I mean, if you can say, what's the alternative, for example, to agile? or say to human business, what's the alternative? If somebody tells me, yeah, by the way, this is the alternative, I'd like to hear about it.
I think there has been so many forces, in particular, eroding, let's say, margins, eroding networks, demand of new competition modelings. Companies have gone faster than before. So there's a huge demand, of course, coming from the exogenous factors to the different companies. So I mean, like you said, there's just not a question if, it's just a question how fast they can transform. So do you think for that transformation, there's also a new generation of leaders required?
Well, yes, but it's not that you throw out all the old ones again. I think that a good leader knows that he or she has to evolve and go with the time. This is true leadership. What worked in the past does not mean that it works in the future. We need a mix of both. I have worked in companies where I introduced Agile, and I worked with the older generation of leaders, as well as with young, say talents, leadership talents, and you need to have both. I think it would be arrogant and ignorant to say we don't need the old leaders anymore. We need the old generation anymore. I'd like to give an example. In 2020 at the World Economic Forum, just prior to a panel, I asked an older couple what they were thinking about the digital age, digitalization and technology. And they explained, well, actually, we're afraid of it because technology is taking over the world. And what happens to us, we no longer, we're just becoming slaves of machines. Then I asked them the question, well, do you have an idea how you want to live in the future? And I said, well, of course we do. And they gave me examples. They would like to live in balance with nature, and and they love their family and friends. And actually, it's pretty cool with their grandkids. They're in contact with them with Skype, and they can still drive because it's kind of semi-autonomous driving. And all of a sudden, they listed all these gadgets and they're using. And I thought, let me reiterate the first question. What do you think about technology and digital transformation? And they said, well, now that we're thinking of it, it's a different perspective, So I think when it comes to the question, how do we want to shape our life, how we want to shape our future, we would be stupid not to listen to, say, the older generation and ask them for advice. What is it, how you want to live in the future? What do you think is important? And let's have a dialogue.
Mm-hmm. In particular, in your experience with a large corporation, what are the biggest challenges that you have encountered by, let's say, supporting that huge transformation?
Well, one of the elements I look at to say, okay, when we look at the incentive system, the bonus system of top management, let's say top management, if they claim, we become an agile organization, we care about the environment, we support the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, UN SDGs. And then you ask them, okay, how is it reflected in your bonus agreement? And if they say, well, actually, it's not part of it because we're still looking at EBIT and shareholder and what have you, it's fake. Mm-hmm. It's not real. So if, let's say, a company, a top management is really committed to transformation, check their bonus agreements. Uh-huh. The incentive systems. It reflects what they're talking about, because they say, well, okay, this is only the extrinsic motivation. Well, yeah, fine. I know that intrinsic motivation is more important, but since you're intrinsically motivated, give me one reason what holds you back from actually also adapting your intrinsic motivation, which is, let's say, reflected in your bonus agreement. Okay. So we'll see. And, there's lots of companies say, yeah, well, UN SDGs are very important. Okay, give me a company or show me the bonus agreement where this is being reflected in the bonus agreement. They say, this is how we, this is our contribution, and see, this is how they are getting paid. Then becomes a true story. So if you ask me for one example, check the bonus system, the incentive system. And there are quite a lot of other challenges, of course. But, this is one thing, one element at the top level where you can learn a lot.
Mm-hmm. What is a challenge that you see to, I don't know how many employees Allianz has, but how to, let's say, move such a crowd into, or let's say to move the ship some degrees to the left or to the right. So the one thing is, of course, I think how you impact the top leadership team, but of course, such a large organization has different layers. And what is your experience with the different layers and how they behave or react to that transformation?
Well, you can start small. You can start on a project level, and then you share stories, and then from there you grow. This is how Microsoft did it. Mm-hmm. How they started the Agile Transformation. Or you can come to companies where they say the top management say we need to change certain things, and let's embark on a journey, and they involve the whole teams. Especially also middle management. They walk the talk. If you look at companies, say, for example, Salesforce, that has undergone an Agile Transformation, it wasn't really truly top down, but it was like top management. They were convinced they have to do this. And it was like top down and bottom up. They did, it was like within a relatively short time, it worked quite well. And if you try to move a tanker, it's tough. It takes a while, but you have to realize if you want to move fast, if you want to be flexible, if you want to be adaptive, it's not so much moving a tanker, but you need to have a fleet of smaller, say, warships that are faster than adaptive. And you have to be, if you want to be innovative, you have to embrace failure as a chance to learn. People say fail fast, it's important. No, it's not that you want to be fail fast, fail and learn fast. Because if you fail and you don't learn, well, then failure is truly bad. But if you say failure is a necessity, a critical necessity to learn, and you live it, then I think you can have a convincing story.
I totally agree. What I did in the past is building up many smaller islands, let's say, in different formats in order to, let's say, foster the discussion also within the teams. So how do you think, also geographically speaking, as Allianz as a global corporation, right? So different countries. Do you think there are certain cultures which are much more adaptive or much more faster, maybe? We had the discussion, of course, now within the pandemic, right? Which, let's say, culture is much more, let's say, dynamic, not to use Agile, but much more dynamic in adaptation.
I think that, a culture makes a huge difference. I think, for example, the American culture is more flexible, more adaptive to change, more open for learning. Because the way they perceive failure is, you make mistakes and you learn from it. If you miss the shot, okay, fine, nice shot, nice try, and then do it again. Whereas, say, in Germany, you make a mistake, sometimes that's it, because people expect sometimes perfection. But whenever you expect perfection the first try, it basically is it's a reflection that you are afraid of change, that you're incapable of handling change. Because perfect with respect to what? If you can make a plan, fine. If it's a stable environment which doesn't change, then you can plan certain things. But if you want to be innovative, if you want to create something new, and you will fail, the question is like, how fast can you fail and how fast can you learn from your mistakes? And we have to create a learning environment, and we have to nurture this environment of a constant, continuous learning, continuous improvement. And it's tough, no doubt. If people think that a transformation is easy, no, transformation can be very hurtful, painful. I like to compare it with a metamorphosis of a caterpillar into becoming a butterfly. Once you have cocoon, it's mush. It's not that you all of a sudden, okay, then the caterpillar becomes a butterfly. No, it's just like it's a mush of all these cells and what have you. And the imaginal cells of the butterfly, they build a network, and then this way, the butterfly becomes a butterfly. But it is basically sometimes you have to give up a lot, and you have to be willing to give up a lot to learn even something better. And the cool thing, and the question is like, how can we use, let's say, you're in a transformation, how can you use your existing skills, the people aboard, to build something even bigger, something better, and which is more joyful, which is faster, which is more adaptive, more flexible. And that's a question. It's not like that you say, okay, I have to plan everything. No, you can't. And it takes gut.
Mm-hmm.
Takes guts.
You mentioned that you had a keynote, I think, last week before in front of teachers. So do you think also that our next generation are prepared for that, let's say, working environments?
Well,
or are they the right way prepared, let's say?
Depends how you define the next generation. I think, my kids, they just finished high school, Abitur, or they're about to. And when they look what they have learned, I think, I don't call them a lost generation, but, it's basically once they have entered elementary school, they have unlearned a lot of things that makes us specialists as human beings, because we only train the mind and we don't train so much our heart and our gut, our intuition. Even though we have these three brains, the head, the heart, and our intuition. And if they look, however, they are more open. They focus more on the purpose of and the why they should do certain things. They are more critical. And what we can do, we need to encourage them to ask questions. And just like kids, asking the why questions, like why are we doing certain things this way or the other way, and teach them how to reframe questions, explore new grounds, and you don't have to learn everything. You just have to know where to find things. How to research. And do we know everything? There's no way. There is absolutely no way. But with the new generation, I hope that the pandemic has triggered some changes, also, especially in Germany with the educational system, that they understand, okay, we have to do things differently. With the educational system, talking about the German educational system, which is still superior, to the US public educational system, which I also experienced when I was younger. Madeleine Albright, the former U.S. Secretary of State, she described the dilemma as follows. They say, we try to master the challenges of the 21st century using the mindset, the thinking of the 20th century, and using the institutions of the 19th century. It doesn't work. And, in the educational system in schools, okay, when you say, okay, why are we doing this? Who's at the center of our attention? It's not the student, it's the teacher. Mm-hmm. Because if you look at classrooms, everything is set up for a perfect teaching environment. It's not about the teacher, it's about the students. The question is, therefore, do we have an ideal learning environment, learning setup in schools? Same thing at the university. And now, of course, it becomes tricky when you say, okay, we have to do it virtually. Now with AI, certain things can be, more interactive. But the questions like for learning, do we have a more or less ideal learning environment? And it doesn't have to be perfect. It can be ideal. Maybe because it's imperfect can become perfect. But again, there's talking about perfection again. But an ideal environment, I think, is involving, it's adaptive, it's explorative, it allows generative learning, and it's not predefined.
I like that. We have family and friends in Finland, and of course we have experienced the school system there, where the curriculum is much more dynamic in a sense that, for example, I always tell the story that they should have learned 3+3. But they learned it in a way. Well, let's go for lunch and let's buy cakes, and we are six students, so we need 6 pieces of cake. So let's try what we can do with the 6 pieces of cake, which mathematical task we can perform. And
exactly.
Of course,
good point. Yeah.
That's how let's say students can apply what is the problem and what they can learn in school to get problems resolved. Same with the different topics they have been asked, which topic you have fun with. Is it water? Is it a tree? Is it whatever? And then the kids could select the different, let's say, mainstream. And the teacher would have then elaborated the different, let's say, materials around that topic. For example, with water, you can do a lot of chemical experiments, right? You can freeze it, you can cook it, whatever. And I think that's a very nice way that I was experiencing how you can adapt, like you said, to the client, which is at the end the student. So regarding Agile, one question I really wanted to ask: do you think that it makes sense in a way that to teach Agile methods at school or at the university, or do you think it makes sense to teach Agile methods at all, or do you think it makes much more sense to just get it started and have maybe a subject matter experts in the team?
No, I think it's actually there's actually called Scrum for Kids, and I did this with my kids, and they semi-successful, did it for a couple of weeks, and they weren't really into it. Maybe it was because the way I explained it, who knows, but it certainly cannot hurt, but it's not so much about the methods or the methodology or the frameworks. It's the values and principles. And you look at some of the values of Agile, continuous learning, and focusing on the why. As you can see, it's even universal. I'm somewhat skeptical whenever people say it's about methods. No, it's not about methods. Unless you understand the values and principles behind it, it's just like fluff, People say, "Oh, we're an Agile company. We're doing SAFe, the SAFe framework." Mm-hmm. No, they're not doing Agile. They're just, following very strict rules of a SAFe environment. Whether or not they're Agile, that needs to be discussed. I'd say in most cases they're not, because they don't have the Agile mindset. Because what matters is if the process is more important than what comes out of it, that's not Agile.
Absolutely agree. And I think it makes more sense to, let's say, enhance or enrich whenever you have the need for the right method, let's say, to apply. But first have a good reason for, like I said, a purpose to have it applied for a certain, let's say, challenge that you want to solve. Good. Let's maybe come to the last question, Thomas. We have been touch basing education and kids. Normally, I ask my guests, what have been the advice to the younger Thomas when he started his career?
I'd say be bolder, try new things, and find out what your comfort zone is, and go beyond your comfort zone. And listen to your intuition more often, and listen to your heart, and just being more authentic. This is what I would share. It's like, basically, when I look at the book I published last year called Human Business, when I wrote it, it's in German. There's an English translation available. It was almost like a therapy, because I learned so much. And actually, my kids, they encouraged me to write it and to talk more about what really moves me, what matters to me, and where I have unlearned it, and why it's so important to learn it again, or to rediscover our human being and this way shaping our future. And it's like, yeah, the best advice, be yourself. Or first, try to find out who you really are, and then have the guts to live your true self.
Go4Leadership, the podcast with Daniel and Gert.
Love it, Thomas. Thank you so much for being our guest today.
Thank you for having me.
Go4Leadership, the podcast.